Howdy. I'm Bowen, Loftin, as said by the introducer, class of 1971, and a very proud Aggie, and was privileged to be the university president between 2009 and 2014. During that time, A&M went through a major odyssey, a journey from its previous home in the Big 12 conference to its new home, current home in the Southeastern Conference, or the SEC as we oftentimes refer to it. This talk is really about the heart of that odyssey, what drove it, what happened along the way, and where we arrived at ultimately. I want to begin, though, by thanking the organizers of the TEDxTAMU event. This is a lot of work, given all the challenges they had to face this year in making this take place. So I appreciate that work, as well as the foundation laid by the national organization. Whether you like it or not, athletics is a very big part of major universities like Texas A&M. You can't walk this campus without seeing Kyle Field looming on one corner of the campus. Reed Arena, another big venue here. And we have 20 or so varsity sports here. We have so many more recreational club sports as well. So you as students are well served by having not only places for you to exercise yourself and your competitive nature and hone your skills in that kind of venue, but you also have the ability to view the 500 or so student athletes we have here on this campus doing varsity sports. The conference we're part of at any one time is a big deal. When I was a student here in the 1960s, I came in 67, we had, of course, football, we had basketball for men, and there were no women's sports here at all. That changed radically in the 70s, and today we have equal numbers of student athletes, roughly, within our university playing varsity sports. We were, for much of the university's life, a member of what was known then as the Southwest Conference, a conference comprised primarily of Texas schools. This picture here was taken in 1967, my freshman year here at Texas A&M. You will not probably recognize Kyle Field as easily as you might want to. This is how it looked on my time. We had the original horseshoe clearly there. We had some structure on the west side there, a small upper deck, as well as a press box. And then across on the east side, you can see just the middle section of what now is the second deck of Kyle Field. As a freshman, my seat was on the very top row of that new section. And I was actually protected from death by a simple 2x4 along the back there because it was still being built. But I went to games there, enjoyed myself immensely, and this particular picture was taken on Thanksgiving Day of 1967, the day we played the University of Texas at Austin here. And we won that game by a score of 10-7. And I was so hoarse I couldn't speak for almost 3 days. But that was my introduction, if you will, as a freshman here to our athletic world as a university, and it was a wonderful place to be. I was busy studying in organizations, but I also spent time looking at football games, basketball games in particular. Baseball was also a special of mine. At that time, our baseball diamond was on this side of the tracks, not the other side of the tracks. The odyssey we took has been characterized by those kinds of schools we've been engaged with. For example, we played the University of Texas at Austin for the very first time in football in 1894. And we played them the last time in 2011. 118 times we met that particular university at games like this one behind me here. It meant a lot to us. We had familiar schools we played every year, like Texas Tech, SMU, TCU, Baylor. But in the 1990s, this old, revered Southwest Conference was becoming quite unstable. You see, it was primarily a one-state conference. And TV networks said, even though Texas is big, it's not big enough for us to be able to support this conference financially. You need to figure it out. So basically, things changed very rapidly. In 1994, the old Big 8, a Midwestern conference, north of us basically, joined with 4 schools here in Texas and became the Big 12. And that conference was our home until I arrived here, basically, a few years after that, until we left it in 2012 and joined the SEC. This Odyssey was very interesting to me. I was right in the middle of it all. I wasn't the only player. There were many people here and elsewhere that worked hard to get us where we wanted to be. But I was able to see everything happening from the inside looking out. What was very interesting to me is how this played out. In 2009, I went to my very first meeting of the Big 12 leadership. We met in Dallas at the conference headquarters there, and it was very obvious to me from my very first meeting who was in charge. The conference was literally run by our friends in Austin, our rivals in Austin. And schools like A&M were kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of work, of money, of ability to control things. And really, Texas, along with Oklahoma and Nebraska, were kind of the 3 schools that had the most clout within this conference. And so I perceived right away, because of the inequality in the conference financially, in terms of say-so and what was being done, this conference perhaps wouldn't last forever. It was simply not a conference I felt had the real stability it needed to last us for a long period of time. Then I heard rumors at the end of 2009, in which I was being told by people in the know that our friends in Austin were talking to a conference on the West Coast called the Pac-10 at that time about not only them moving there, but taking us with them and other schools in the Big 12 as well. And I happened to be in Austin in December of 2009, meeting with their president, a man named Bill Powers. After we got done with our business, I asked people to leave the room, so we were alone. And I told Bill, I said, Bill, I'm hearing rumors about you talking to the Pac-10 about moving not only yourselves, but us into that conference. Is that true? He walked up to me, put his hand on my shoulder, looked me in the eye and said, I can't tell you about that right now, but don't worry, whatever happens, we'll take care of you. As an Aggie, that was a hard thing to deal with. I didn't slug him, I controlled myself, but the condescension I felt coming from him, probably unintended by him, but certainly was there from my standpoint, it was almost overwhelming. The rumors persisted. The next month in January of 2010, he was in my office, and we had the same conversation with the same outcome. Don't worry, no matter what happens, we'll take care of you, was his directive to me. Well, once I informed the Board of Regents about that, they were clearly upset, as I was, about this sort of attitude and the possibility of us being uprooted from our current conference and moved elsewhere without even being consulted about it. And so I was directed to begin looking at alternatives. Being a physicist by training, analytical by bent, I actually put together a spreadsheet with more than 20 dimensions looking at the pros and cons of our remaining in the Big 12, going to the Pac-10 or going to another conference, and the one I looked at most carefully was the SEC. And that analysis showed me very clearly, objectively, that the SEC would be a much better fit for us than any other possible conference affiliation. And that's why I told the Board of Regents. And we moved on a pathway in the first half of 2010 to make that reality, but the political leadership of our state decided that was not going to happen. And we and our friends in Austin were both told to stand down. This happened in July of 2010. My first phone call, though, after that meeting was to call the commissioner of the SEC to make sure that we still had an open door if we could see a change of the climate politically here in the state about our ability to join them and move from the Big 12. And he assured me we did. So we bided our time, but our friends in Austin gave us the ideal vehicle. It turns out in 2010, as this began to get public, it was very clear to me that the university's former students and current students were divided, perhaps 50-50. Half wanting to go to the SEC, the other half wanting to stay in the Big 12 or go to the PAC. We were not a unified body of people that cared about Texas A&M but had the same vision for where we're going to be. So I worked through with many people here on this campus and with the SEC the process for us to continue our journey, our Odyssey into that new conference. And we were helped immensely by the creation by Austin of the Longhorn Network. That network was put in place by them in late 2010, and because of the clear advantage it seemed to give them in terms of recruiting, visibility, and money, we did not like it, and many others did not, and we went from a 50-50 kind of opinion about this at Texas A&M to a 95-5. So I would say by early 2011, 95% of our former students and current students were really very much committed to moving to the SEC. Maybe 5% were still worried about things and wanted to stay put or move with Texas to the PAC. And things got in the way again. Challenges emerged, especially from our friends to the north here in Waco. They threatened to sue the SEC and us both if we didn't stay put. And we had to work through a lot of issues to get through that process, but we succeeded. And so basically a year later, after our first attempt was stopped in 2010, the middle of 2011, we were able to make it happen. And then we had a great celebration here in the early part of this fall of 2011, in which we were able to celebrate that. Just a couple of pictures here. This is sort of my view of the end of the Big 12 for us. This happened actually in 2010, not 2011 or 2012. This is the Nebraska game we played at Kyle Field in the fall of 2010 against Nebraska. We won that game by 9-6. And it was a game that our students, our 12th man, won. Literally, the sound of students on the east side made it impossible to communicate on the field, and Nebraska failed time and again to make progress because they couldn't communicate with each other. So the 12th man won the game, and at the end, they threw down 30,000 towels. And this mural is over in the MSC. If you walk by it every day, probably, when you go into that building. That, to me, is a great memory of the Big 12 we were in. But this is the place we started in terms of our joining officially the SEC. The person you see here beside me is Bernie Matchin, at that time the president of the University of Florida and chairman of the SEC board. Next to him is Mike Slive, the commissioner of the SEC, a great friend who passed away a few years ago. And we were celebrating over in the Zone Club at Kyle Field, North End, our transition into the SEC as being a public announcement. The official date of starting was the next year in 2012, July 1, and we were then officially part of the SEC. So we learned a lot here in this Odyssey. This Odyssey taught us about trust. It taught us that we had to really do what a former president of the United States once said: trust but verify. Be sure that people that are engaged with you are honest, open, and transparent about what's going on. That was not true in 2010, so we worked hard in 2011 to make that so, and it really served us very well. In 2010, we did not control the narrative. In 2011, we did. And that was really a matter of trust, of having the right people you believe in, doing the right things. We also were able to move along other pathways in parallel. We were able to do many things with this. But I have to emphasize the true rationales of why we joined the SEC. I've already mentioned the potential instability in the Big 12. Baylor was upset at us and threatened to sue us, not because they wanted to, because they felt they had to. They felt threatened by our departure. They thought the Big 12, being perhaps unstable, might fall apart. It didn't. It still exists today, and Baylor is still doing very well with that. But that was not clear to us back at this time in 2011. The other thing we were able to do is really look carefully at how being in a different conference would help Texas A&M and its students. In particular, we saw the visibility of A&M being very, very enhanced by being in the SEC. Consider that the Big 12's TV venue is Fox Sports Southwest, a regional carrier that deals with the part of the U.S. we're in right here, a regional part of the U.S., not the entire country. Whereas SEC is served by ESPN and CBS and was already very nationally visible. So I saw, and others saw with me, that being in the SEC gave our university much greater visibility. It meant that an Aggie living in New York City or Seattle could actually see a football game in a bar on TV, which they couldn't do as a member of the Big 12. And in fact, you can see us play sports in London, in Beijing, anywhere in the world, literally. That's how broad the network is that's been created to support the SEC and its member institutions. And we also owed it to our student athletes to give them the very best possible pathway to a professional career if they wanted it. And you can look every year at the stats and see clearly that those members of the SEC in football, for example, are a larger number as far as those going to the NFL than those other conferences around the country. So all three of those dimensions we talked about: visibility, opportunities for our student athletes, and of course money, were realized by our transition to the SEC. In fact, this headline from the Dallas Morning News was all about this 100-year decision we made to join the SEC, and in this case, the financial rewards that came with that. But I have to emphasize from my standpoint, and many others here, it wasn't just money that we were looking for. It was really a place to let this university shine, to be visible, to enhance the opportunities available to its student athletes. So we built the brand, and it's benefited all of us in so many, many ways. So I'm very pleased to see us learn lessons about trust, about being persistent, making sure you don't give up, and also being able to be resilient, to be able to adapt. We had all these challenges emerging during this Odyssey we took, but those challenges were met by us being able to adapt, to find creative solutions and work together. So we got to the end of this journey in a successful way, and we enjoyed the Johnny Manziel effect in 2012. Appreciate your time. Thanks, and gig 'em.